Imagine a big country and its ruler king needs help to manage such a large area. The ruler can't be in every place at once, so he divides the country into different parts called provinces. Each province is like a smaller section of the big country. Now, for each province, the ruler chooses someone to look after it. This person is called a governor. The governor's job is to manage that province, make sure people follow rules, collect taxes, and handle problems. In the case of the Maurya Empire, which was a large and powerful empire in ancient India, the country was divided into at least 4 provinces. 1 southern province, the main city was Suvarnagiri. 2 northern province, the headquarters were in Taxila. 3 western province, the main city was Ujjaini. 4 eastern province, the center was Tosali. Example to help you understand. Imagine you have a school that is very big, too big for just one principal to handle. So the principal divides the school into 4 sections. Section A for the small kids, Section B for the middle kids, Section C for the bigger kids, Section D for special classes. Then the principal asks 4 teachers, governors, to look after each section. Important points. Governors were like managers. They took care of different parts of the empire, helping the ruler control and manage everything. Ashoka was one of these governors. Before he became a famous emperor, Ashoka was in charge of Ujjaini, the western province, when his father, Bindusara, was ruling the empire. Royal princes often became governors. The inscriptions, old writings carved on stones, show that royal family members, like the king's sons, were often chosen as governors. This is shown by the use of the word Kumara, which means prince, or Aryaputra, son of a nobleman. An extra example. Think about a big company that has offices in different cities. The company owner can't be in all cities at once, so they appoint managers, governors to run each office. The owner's sons or daughters, princes, might be chosen to be the managers of the most important offices. More information. One old inscription, known as the Girnar inscription, mentions a man named Pushyagupta. He was a governor called Rashtriya of a place called Saurashtra during the time of Chandragupta Maurya, Ashoka's grandfather. This shows how important people were given the responsibility to manage provinces. So in short, the Maurya Empire was very big, and the rulers made sure they had governors in place to manage different regions of the empire. This system helped them maintain control and keep everything running smoothly. Much like how a school or a company is divided into sections with different managers. All right, let's go step by step, breaking everything down into the simplest explanation. 1. What were these officers? In Ashoka's empire, the king couldn't manage everything on his own because the empire was so big, so he needed people to help him manage smaller areas like districts. These helpers or officers were the Pradeshika, Rajka, and Yukta. 2. What did they do? Each officer had a special job to do, just like different workers have specific roles in a big company or school. Let's talk about them one by one. Pradeshika. Who were they? The Pradeshikas were like managers. Their job was to look after large areas or districts within the empire. What did they do? They made sure the king's orders were followed, people obeyed the laws, and the district was running smoothly. Think of them as the principal of a school, ensuring that all classrooms are in order and everyone is following the rules. Who were they? The Rajukas were important officers whose main job was to measure land. What does measuring land mean? In Ashoka's time, the amount of land a person owned determined how much tax they had to pay. So Rajukas used ropes to measure the size of land. The word Rajuka might come from the word Raju, meaning rope, because they used ropes for measuring. Imagine if you had a big piece of land and wanted to know exactly how big it is. The Rajuka would stretch a long rope to figure out how many meters or feet your land covers. Did they do more than measure land? Yes. In Ashoka's time, the Rajukas didn't just measure land. They were also given more important jobs. They worked on public welfare, which means they helped make people's lives better. For example, They might make sure roads are safe, water is clean, and food is available. They were also given judicial functions, meaning they acted as judges, settling disputes between people and making sure everyone was treated fairly. They also helped spread Dhamma, which was Ashoka's set of moral teachings, like being kind, honest, and respectful to others.
Yukta, who were they?
The Yukta were like general assistants. They helped with many different tasks and duties within the district. What did they do? Their job could include managing resources, helping with tax collection, and making sure everything ran smoothly. Think of them as all-round helpers who made sure that everything was in order.
Now 3.
What were the tours about? Ashoka wanted his officers to go on tours every 5 years. What does this mean? Every 5 years, these officers, the Pradeshika, Rajuka, and Yuk, travelled around the kingdom to talk to the people. They taught people about Dhamma, which means good behaviour and kindness. Ashoka cared a lot about spreading peace and wanted everyone to be good to each other. So these officers made sure people understood how to live better, more honest lives. They also checked on how things were going in the villages and towns, making sure the people were taken care of and their problems were heard. Out of 4, Rajukas and Agronomoi. A Greek visitor named Megasthenes visited India during Chandragupta Maurya's rule, Ashoka's grandfather. He talked about officers called Agronomoi who measured land. Historians believe that Rajukas may have been similar to the Agronomoi because both groups were in charge of land measurement and revenue collection. 5. Simple example to understand it all. Imagine your school is very big. The principal, like the king, needs some help to run the school smoothly. So the principal appoints 3 types of teachers, officers. Teacher A, like the Pradeshika, is in charge of making sure all classrooms are clean, the students are behaving, and the school rules are being followed. Teacher B, like the Rajuka, has a special job to measure how big each classroom is, so they know how many students can fit inside. But this teacher also helps students by giving them advice on how to be kind and fair, and sometimes even acts as a referee in solving fights between students. Teachers like Yukta helps with different tasks like taking attendance, organising supplies, and making sure all the classrooms have what they need. Every 5 years, these teachers go around the school checking how students are doing, talking to them about kindness and fairness, and making sure the school is running well. Hub 6. More information. The Arthashastra, an ancient Indian book about politics and governance, talks about the Yukta as a general officer, but it doesn't mention the Rajuka. This shows that the Rajuka might have become more important in Ashoka's time. The Rajukas were not just land measurers. Ashoka gave them more responsibilities, making them high-ranking officers who were trusted to help with people's welfare and justice. Conclusion. In Ashoka's empire, the Pradeshika, Rajuka, and Yukta were officers who played different roles in managing the districts. While the Rajukas originally measured land for taxes, Ashoka expanded their duties, making them judges and promoters of his moral teachings, or Dhamma. These officers ensured that the empire ran smoothly, just like teachers in a school help the principal keep everything organised and working well. Let's break this down into simple words and go step by step. 1. Who were the Pradeshika, Rajuka, and Yukta? These were important officers in the empire of King Ashoka, a great ruler of India. They worked at the district level. Think of a district like a large neighbourhood that needs to be managed. These officers helped Ashoka control and manage different parts of his empire because the empire was too big for one person to do everything. 2. What did Ashoka want these officers to do? Ashoka asked these officers to go on tours every 5 years. Why did they go on tours? They travelled to different places in the district to teach people about Dhamma, Ashoka's idea of living a good, kind, and honest life. They also did other important work like helping people with problems and checking if rules were being followed. Hammer 3.
Rajuka, the land measurer!
The Rajukas were officers who had a special job. What was their main job? They were in charge of measuring land. When people owned land, the amount of tax they had to pay depended on how much land they owned. The Rajukas used ropes to measure this land. The word Rajuka might come from Raju, which means rope. Example: imagine if you had a big piece of land for farming and the Rajuka came to measure it to see how large it is. This would help the king know how much tax you need to pay. More than just land measurers. Although measuring land was their main job, Ashoka gave them more responsibilities. They also helped with public welfare, making sure people were happy and had what they needed: water, food, and roads. Worked as judges to solve problems between people and keep things fair. Taught people about Dhamma and how to be good, kind, and respectful to each other. 4. Rajuka and agronomoi. A Greek traveller named Megasthenes visited India during Chandragupta Maurya's rule, Ashoka's grandfather. He talked about officers called agronomoi who also measured land. Some historians believe the Rajukas were similar to these agronomoi because both were in charge of measuring land and helping with taxes. 5.
Pradeshika and Yukta.
Now let's talk about the Pradeshika and Yukta. Pradeshika. They were like managers of the district. They made sure that everything in the district was running smoothly and that the king's orders were followed. The Yukta were like general helpers. They assisted with different tasks, like managing resources or collecting taxes. 6. What about the Arthashastra? The Arthashastra was a famous book written in ancient India about how to rule a kingdom. It talks about officers called Yuktas, general helpers, but it doesn't mention the Rajukas. This suggests that Rajukas might have become important during Ashoka's time. 7. Why did they go on tours? Ashoka cared a lot about spreading Dhamma and wanted everyone in his kingdom to be kind, honest, and good to each other. So he sent these officers on tours every 5 years to teach people about Dhamma, check how things were going in the district, make sure people were following the rules. 8. Simple example. Imagine a school where the principal, Ashoka, needs help to manage different classrooms. So he hires Teacher A, Pradeshika. This teacher makes sure all classrooms are running smoothly and the rules are followed. Teacher B, Rajuka. This teacher measures the size of each classroom to decide how many students can fit. But they also help students be fair, solve problems, and teach them to be kind and respectful. This teacher helps with all kinds of tasks, like collecting homework, organizing books, and making sure students have everything they need. Conclusion. In Ashoka's empire, the Pradeshika, Rajuka, and Yukta were officers who helped manage the districts. The Rajuka, who originally measured land using ropes, were later given more important duties by Ashoka, like helping people, solving disputes, and teaching Dhamma. These officers made sure that the kingdom ran smoothly, just like how teachers in a school help the principal manage everything. Sure, let's go step by step and explain it even more simply. Ashta 1. What is the Arthashastra? The Arthashastra is a very old book written by Kautilya, also known as Chanakya. He was a smart advisor to a king. This book is like a guide for kings. It tells them how to run their kingdom, how to manage people, and how to keep the country strong and safe. Managing villages in groups. Villages are small places where people live, like a small town. A king can't manage all the villages by himself, so Kautilya suggested dividing them into groups and putting someone in charge of each group. Let's look at how Kautilya grouped the villages. Stania. This was the main headquarters for managing 800 villages. It's like having one big office that takes care of a lot of villages. Think of it like the headquarters of a company that controls many branches, villages. This was an office to manage 400 villages. It is smaller than Stania, but still takes care of many villages. Kavatika. This office was responsible for 200 villages. Samgrana. This was the smallest unit, taking care of just 10 villages. Simple example. Imagine you are running a big school with 800 students. Instead of managing all 800 students by yourself, you can divide them into smaller groups. Stania is like the principal's office that takes care of the whole school. Dronomica is like the vice principal who manages half of the students. Karvatika is like the head teacher who manages 200 students. Samgrahana is like a classroom teacher who looks after 10 students. This way the school, or in this case the kingdom, runs smoothly because everyone has their own group to take care of.
Have 3.
Who were the officers? Each of these groups of villages needed a person to manage it. Here's who managed each group. Stanika. This was the officer in charge of the Stania, which managed 800 villages. He was responsible for making big decisions for these 800 villages. Think of him like the district officer or the head of a big department. The Gopa worked under the Stanika and managed smaller groups of villages, 5 to 10 villages. Think of them like the managers who report to the district officer for village level management. Now let's look at how each individual village was managed. Gramika. Each village had its own leader called the Gramika. The Gramika was in charge of everything in the village, like solving problems, collecting taxes, and making sure people followed the rules. You can think of the Gramika like the mayor of a small town. Gramavridas, village elders. These were the wise older people in the village. The elders gave advice to the village headman and helped him make important decisions. People trusted the elders because of their experience and wisdom. Simple example, imagine a village is like a small class in a school. The Gramika is like the class teacher responsible for taking care of the class. The Gramavridas are like the senior students or older family members who helped the teacher make good decisions. Cash salaries. Kautilya said that these officers, like the Stanika and Gramika, should be paid in cash for their work. This made sure that they did their jobs well and stayed loyal to the king. Summary. Kautilya in the Artha Shastra gave very detailed advice about how to manage villages in a big kingdom. He suggested dividing the villages into groups and having officers like the Stanika and Gopa to take care of them. At the village level, the Gramika village headman and Gramavridas village elders played a key role in making sure everything was done correctly. This structure made it easier for the king to manage his large kingdom because everyone knew their role and had a specific group of villages to take care of. Extra example for understanding. Think of the kingdom like a big puzzle. Each village is a puzzle piece. The officers, like Stanika and Gopa, are in charge of making sure all the pieces fit together and work well. The king oversees everything from the top, but he relies on his officers to take care of different parts of the puzzle, the kingdom. Sure, let's break down this edict even further into very simple parts. We'll go step by step, word by word, so it's easy to understand. Who is speaking? Ashoka is speaking, was a great king who ruled a long time ago in India. He is also called Devanampiya Piyadasi. This was a name he used, which means beloved of the gods, he who looks on with affection. He cared deeply about his people and wanted to make sure they were happy and living a good life. 2. What is a rock edict? A rock edict is like a public message carved into stone for everyone to read. Ashoka had these carved so people could know what he wanted to say. In this rock edict, Rock Edict 6, Ashoka is telling his people about the changes he has made to make sure the kingdom is well run. 3. What was the old system? In the past, before Ashoka, reports or important information didn't reach the king quickly. State business, like running the kingdom, was done only at certain times. This means people couldn't bring their problems or news to the king anytime they wanted. 4. What change did Ashoka make? Ashoka changed this system so that people could report to him anytime and anywhere. He wanted to stay updated about what was happening with his people at all times. How did he do this? Ashoka appointed reporters called Pativevdakas. These were officials whose job was to tell the king about any news or problems in the kingdom, no matter where Ashoka was. 5. Where can people report to Ashoka? Ashoka made it clear that people can bring reports to him at any time, even if he is eating. He is in his private room, he is in the cow pen, where the cows are kept. He is in his palanquin, a carriage or chair he uses to travel. He is in the parks or gardens, relaxing. Example, imagine the king has a messenger who comes to him wherever he is, even if he's having dinner or taking a walk. The king always wants to know what's happening and is ready to listen. 6. What if there is an argument? Ashoka also says that if there is any disagreement or argument at something important, like a donation he made, a rule he announced, or any urgent problem, something that needs to be solved quickly, it must be reported to him right away, no matter where he is. Example? If the officials in Ashoka's kingdom are fighting over how to share something like money or resources, they should let Ashoka know immediately. He wants to help solve the problem quickly. 7. Ashoka's dedication. Ashoka says that he works very hard to take care of his people. He is always willing to listen to their problems and solve them. He never feels tired of doing this because he sees it as his duty to help everyone. Simple example. Think of Ashoka like a teacher who is always ready to listen to students' problems, even during lunch or break time, because he cares about them and wants to help. 8. Why does Ashoka do this? Ashoka believes that it's his responsibility to help all living beings. He works hard so that people can be happy in this world and also live good lives after they die in the next world or heaven. Simple example. Ashoka is like someone who wants to help people feel happy not only while they are alive, but also after they pass away, by encouraging them to live good moral lives. 9. Why did Ashoka write this message? Ashoka wrote this edict, Message on the Rock, because he wants it to last a long time. He hopes that his sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons, future kings, will also follow these rules and take care of people, just like he does. Simple example. Imagine Ashoka is like a father teaching his children how to be kind and helpful. He wants his children, and even their children, to keep caring for others, even after he is gone. Hard work is needed. Ashoka knows that it's not easy to make sure everyone is happy and taken care of. It takes a lot of hard work, but he says that it's worth the effort because it's his duty to help others. Simple example. Ashoka is like a coach who knows that winning a game is hard work, but he is always ready to put in the effort because it's the right thing to do for his team. Summary in very simple words. Ashoka, a great king, wanted to take care of his people all the time. He made a system where reporters could tell him about any problems, no matter where he was and what he was doing. If there was a dispute or argument about anything important, he wanted to hear about it and solve it quickly. Ashoka worked very hard because he thought it was his duty to help everyone be happy and live good lives, both in this world and the next. He hoped that his children and grandchildren would continue his work and take care of the people in the same way. In short, Ashoka was a king who always wanted to listen to his people's problems, solve them, and make them happy. He worked hard and set a good example for future rulers. Sure, here it is. Who were Patavakas and Pulisani? In Ashoka's inscriptions, he talks about two types of people. Patavakas, these were like spies or reporters. Their job was to gather information about the people's opinions, activities, or anything else that was important and then report it to the king. Example, imagine a person who quietly listens to what's happening in the town and then tells the king all the important things. The king can then act based on what he learns. These were higher-ranking officers than the Pativadakas. They had a bigger job. They didn't just report what was happening, but were responsible for wider tasks and had more power. Example, if the Pativedaka is like a local news reporter, the Pulisani is like a senior official who manages important tasks across the kingdom. Megasthenes, a Greek visitor to India, mentioned similar officers who kept an eye on things in the kingdom. He called them episkopoi or ephoroi. Intelligence system, spy network in ancient India. In ancient India, the government used spies to keep everything under control. This system was essential because the king needed to know what was happening everywhere. The Artha Shastra, an ancient Indian text, gives instructions on using spies. Here's what it says. There were two main types of spies, Sanstha spies. These were spies who stayed in one place. Example, imagine a person in a village who is a spy but works there every day like a shopkeeper or a farmer. They quietly gather information and send it to the king. Sanchara spies. These spies traveled from place to place. Example, think of a spy who goes from village to village, pretending to be a trader or traveler, but is actually gathering secrets and reporting to the king. How did they choose spies? Spies could be selected from different groups of people. Merchants, people who buy and sell things, priests, religious leaders, teachers, or even students. They would pretend to be doing normal jobs, but they were actually spying for the king. Spies would also use disguises. They'd dress up to look like ordinary people, but they were gathering important information the whole time. Example, imagine a spy dressing up like a musician or a beggar. Nobody would suspect them, but they would secretly be listening to conversations and sending reports to the king. What did Megasthenes say about city administration? Megasthenes was a Greek historian who visited India and wrote about how the cities were managed. He described how the city of Pataliputra, the capital of ancient India, was run. He said there were 6 committees of 5 members each who were in charge of different tasks. Each committee focused on a specific job to make sure everything worked well. Here are the 6 committees and their jobs. Industrial arts. This group checked the work of people who made things like clothes, tools, or furniture. Example, imagine them going around the city and making sure that blacksmiths who make tools and tailors who make clothes were doing a good job. Entertainment and surveillance of foreigners. This committee made sure visitors to the city were taken care of and kept an eye on them to prevent trouble. Example, when a traveller from another country came to Pataliputra, this group made sure they were safe, but also watched them to make sure they followed the rules. Records of births and deaths. This group kept a record of everyone who was born and everyone who died. Example, imagine a person whose job is to write down every birth and death in the city, like keeping track of a city's population. Trade and commerce. This committee inspected goods being sold in the market and made sure traders were using correct weights and measures so people weren't cheated. Example, these officers would check to see if merchants were using the right scales to weigh things like grain or gold, so customers got a fair deal. Public sales of goods. This group made sure everything sold in the market was of good quality and fairly priced. Example, they would walk around the market and make sure nobody was selling bad or faulty goods. If something was overpriced, they would fix it. Taxes on merchandise. This committee collected taxes from traders when they sold goods in the market. Example, when a merchant sold something, this group would collect a small percentage of the money as tax, which would go to the king. Let me know if you need anything else.
Sure.
Here it is. Nagalavyo Halaka Mahamatras and Nagaraka officers. The Nagalavyo Halaka Mahamatras were officers mentioned in Ashoka's inscriptions. These officers were responsible for city administration, making sure everything in the city was working well. Example, they were similar to the committees Megasthenes talked about. They made sure markets were running properly, people were treated fairly, and taxes were collected. The Arthashastra also talks about an officer called the Nagaraka. The Nagaraka was in charge of the entire city's administration. He had officers working under him, like Sthanikas. They managed larger areas, similar to districts, big groups of villages. Example, if a Nagaraka was like a mayor of a city, the Sthanikas were like officers in charge of the towns surrounding the city. Gopas. They managed smaller areas, usually 5 to 10 villages. Example, if a Sthanika managed a group of 50 villages, the Gopas managed the smaller clusters of villages. Summary in simple terms, Pativedakas and Pulasani were officers who kept the king informed about the kingdom. Pativedakas were spies, while Pulasani were higher-ranking officers with more power. Ancient India had a strong spy system. Spies could be stationary, staying in one place, or moving around, traveling spies. They used disguises to blend in with normal people. Megasthenes described how the city of Pataliputra was run by 6 committees, each managing a specific area like trade, taxes, and the market. Ashoka's officers, Nagalavyohalaka Mahamatras, made sure cities were well run, similar to what Megasthenes described. The Arthashastra talks about city officers called Nagaraka, who had officers like Sthanikas for big districts and Gopas for smaller villages working under them. This way, the king always knew what was going on in the kingdom, and the cities were managed carefully to ensure everything ran smoothly. Let me know if you need anything else. Sure. Let's go into more detail, step by step, and explain everything in the simplest way possible. 1. What is the Arthashastra? Definition. The Arthashastra is an ancient Indian text written by Kautilya, also called Chanakya. It serves as a guide on how to run a kingdom. Content. It covers many topics, including how to manage money, land, trade, and people. Think of it like a big rule book for kings. 2. The importance of the kosher treasury. This word means the treasury, which is the place where the king keeps money and valuable things. Importance. The kosher is very important because it helps the king pay for things needed in the kingdom, like food, soldiers, and building projects. A well-managed treasury ensures that the kingdom can handle emergencies or pay for public services. Imagine if your family has a savings account. This money helps pay for groceries, school, and other needs. Similarly, the king uses the treasury to support the kingdom.
No.
3. What are the Saptanga Rajya? Definition. The Saptanga Rajya means the 7 elements of a kingdom. Each element is essential for the kingdom to function well. Elements include the king, ruler, ministers, the army, defense, the treasury, kosher, the land, resources, the people, citizens, the allies, friends of the kingdom. 4. Main jobs of the people. The Arthashastra lists the main jobs that people do to help the kingdom earn money. The 3 main occupations are agriculture, growing crops, such as wheat, rice, or vegetables. Farmers are crucial for providing food. Animal husbandry, raising animals like cows, goats, and chickens. These animals can provide milk, meat, and eggs. Trade, buying and selling goods in markets. Traders help move products from one place to another. Example, think about a farmer who grows rice, a family that raises chickens for eggs, and a shopkeeper who sells fruits in the local market. Each person plays a role in making sure everyone has food and goods. Part 5. The importance of land. Land as a resource. Land is very important because it is where people grow food, build houses, and create wealth. It is the main way for the king to earn money through taxes. Taxes are payments that people give to the king from what they earn. This money helps the king run the kingdom. 6. Who owns the land? Ownership. The Arthashastra clarifies that not all land belongs to the king. There are 2 types of land ownership. Private land. This is land that belongs to individuals. They can grow crops and keep the money they make. State-owned land. This land belongs to the king. It is managed by an officer called the Sitajaksh. Example, imagine if you own a backyard garden, private land, where you grow flowers, but the local park where everyone plays is like state-owned land managed by the city. 7. Understanding Kshetra, land-related Kshetra. This word means land. It is considered property, and there are rules for buying and selling it. Kshetrika, the owner of the field. This person owns the land. A tenant. This is someone who does not own the land, but works on it and pays rent to the owner. Example, if you rent a house, the landlord owner is like the Kshetrika, and you, the renter, are like the Upavasa. 8. Resolving land disputes. Disputes. Sometimes 2 people might argue over who owns a piece of land. Resolution. If neither person can prove they own the land, it goes to the king. The king or his officials will make the final decision. Example, think about two kids arguing over who owns a toy. If they can't prove it, the parent steps in to decide who gets the toy. Hash 9. Taxes and farmers. The Arthashastra says that farmers do not lose their land if they cannot pay their taxes. This means farmers can keep their land even if they have trouble paying. Example, if a kid cannot pay for lunch at school, they still get food. Similarly, farmers can keep their land and crops even if they struggle to pay taxes.
No.
10. Sharecropping. Definition. Sharecroppers are people who work on land that belongs to someone else. They grow crops and share part of what they harvest with the landowner. Types of sharecroppers. Ardasitikas. They keep half of the crop for themselves and give the other half to the owner. Svavyopajivins. They keep 1/4 to 1/5 of the crop. Example, if a sharecropper grows 100 apples on a landowner's farm, the landowner might take 50 apples and the sharecropper keeps 50 if they are Ardasitikas. If they are Svavyopajivins, they might only keep 20 apples and give the rest to the landowner. Conclusion. The Arthashastra provides important information about how to run a kingdom, focusing on the treasury, land ownership, and people's jobs. Land is crucial for farming and earning money, and there are rules about who owns it and how it can be used. Disputes can be resolved fairly, and farmers are protected from losing their land if they struggle to pay taxes. Sharecropping allows people to work land they do not own while sharing the produce with the landowner. This explanation helps you understand how land, farming, and money work in an ancient Indian kingdom according to the Arthashastra. If you have any more questions or need further details, feel free to ask. Sure. Let's dive deeper into the details about taxation in ancient India and explain everything step by step in the simplest way possible. Understanding taxes in ancient India. In ancient India, the king needed money to run the kingdom. This money came from taxes. Taxes are payments that people make to the king or government so they can use the roads, have protection from enemies, and get services like irrigation, water systems for farming. Who paid taxes? Different people paid different types of taxes based on what they did. Here are the main groups that paid taxes. 1. Farmers, people who grew crops on land. 2. Herders, people who took care of animals like cows and goats. 3. Artisans, people who made things like potters or carpenters. 4. Traders, people who sold goods in markets. What did the ancient writers say? Several ancient writers talked about how taxes worked. Here are some important writers and what they said. 1. Megasthenes. He was a Greek historian who wrote about India. Later writers used his ideas but added their own opinions. 2. Diodorus. Diodorus said that farmers paid a misthos to the king. This word could mean a rent or wage for using the land. He also said farmers gave an additional 1/4 of their crops to the king. So if a farmer had 4 baskets of rice, they would give 1 basket to the king. 3. Strabo. Strabo also mentioned that farmers worked the land for a misthos. He agreed with Diodorus that they gave 1/4 of their crops to the king. 4. Arrian. Arrian talked about phoros, another kind of tax. He said that not just farmers, but also herders, artisans, and traders had to pay this tax to the king and local cities. What did the Arthashastra say? The Arthashastra is a very important ancient Indian text written by Kautilya, also called Chanakya. It provided a lot of information about how to run a kingdom, including taxes. Here's what it said. 1. King's share. The king usually took 1/6 of the produce crops as his share. Example, if a farmer grew 6 baskets of wheat, they gave 1 basket to the king. 2. Types of taxes. The Arthashastra mentions other taxes, like
Kara.
another tax on people, though it's not clearly defined what it was for. Bali, possibly a tax based on how much land a person owned. This was a water tax. Farmers might pay 1/5 to 1/3 of their produce for using irrigation water. Example, if a farmer produced 10 baskets of rice, they might have to give 2 to 4 baskets as a water tax if they used irrigation. Special case, Ashoka's Raminday inscription. Ashoka, one of the most famous kings of India, had an inscription at Rumande in modern-day Nepal that said the villagers were exempt from the Bali tax, meaning they didn't have to pay this tax. The king's share, Bhaga, was reduced to 1/8 of their crops instead of the usual 1/6. What happened if the treasury was low? Sometimes the king didn't have enough money in the treasury to run the kingdom. In these cases, the Artha Shastra stated that the king could impose extra taxes. Here's what that looked like. 1. Farmers could be asked to give 1/4 to 1/3 of their produce depending on the quality of their land. Example, if a farmer had good land, they might have to give 1/3 of their harvest. If they had less productive land, it might be 1/4. 2. Traders would also face extra taxes when the king needed more money. 3. Other people, like actors, singers, and prostitutes, had to pay taxes on what they earned. Example of how taxes worked. Let's use a simple example to make it clearer. Imagine you're a farmer and you grow 10 baskets of rice. Normally, you give 1/6 to the king as tax. If you used irrigation for your rice, you might also need to pay 2 baskets as a water tax, which could be 1/5 of your total. So far, you've given 3 baskets in taxes. Now, if the king is low on money, he might say, I need more. You have to give me 1/4 or 1/3 of your total. If he says 425 baskets, because 10 baskets divided equals 2.5. If he says 1/3, you have to give 3.33 baskets, because 10 baskets divided by 3 equals about 3.33. In this case, if the king asked for a higher percentage, your taxes could get very high, and you would have to give a lot of your harvest. Recap. Farmers usually gave 1/6 of their crops to the king. They might pay more taxes, like water taxes, depending on their situation. Different writers gave slightly different details about how much farmers paid. Ashoka reduced some taxes in specific areas to help the villagers. If the kingdom needed more money, the king could increase taxes on farmers and traders. By understanding this, you get a clearer picture of how the tax system worked in ancient India. Sure, let's break down the information about urban taxes and how Kautilya, also called Chanakya, discussed managing resources in ancient India. We'll keep it super simple and easy to understand. Urban taxes. In cities, urban areas, people pay different kinds of taxes. Here are the main ones. 1. Shulka. This is a tax on goods that are brought into, imported, or sent out of, exported, the city. Example. If someone brings oranges from another place to sell in the city, they might have to pay a tax on those oranges. If a trader takes silk to another place, they pay a tax on that too. 2. Excise duty. This is a tax on things made in the city, local manufacturers. Example, if a potter makes pots, he might pay a tax on each pot he sells in the market. Payment of taxes. Taxes could be paid in cash, money, or in kind, goods or produce. Example, instead of paying money, a farmer might give rice or vegetables to pay their taxes. Kautilya's recommendations. Kautilya was very practical about managing resources. Here's what he suggested. 1. Buffer stock. If taxes were collected in the form of grains, like rice or wheat, Kautilya advised that these should be kept as buffer stock. This means saving them to use later in case of a food shortage. Example, if there's a drought when it doesn't rain and crops fail, the king can use the saved grains to help feed people. 2. Protection of agriculture. Kautilya believed it was very important to protect farmers and their lands. Example, if a farmer's land was damaged by an enemy, like during a war, or if it was affected by disease or famine, that land should not be taxed. This would help farmers recover without the extra burden of paying taxes when they are already struggling. State property. Kautilya also described certain resources as belonging to the state. Here's what he included. 1. Forests, areas filled with trees and wildlife. 2. Pastures, open lands where animals can graze, eat grass. 3. Mines, places where valuable minerals like gold or silver are dug up. Importance of mines. Mines were especially important, and they were managed by an officer called the Akaradyaksha. This officer was in charge of ensuring that the mines were properly worked and that the resources were used wisely for the kingdom. Summary: urban taxes included shulka, tax on imported and exported goods; excise duty, tax on things made in the city. Taxes could be paid in money or goods. Kautilya suggested keeping a stock of grains for emergencies, protecting farmers and their lands from taxes if damaged. Certain resources like forests, pastures and mines were state property. Mines were managed by an officer to ensure they were used properly. Simple example to understand. Let's say there is a farmer named Ravi. Ravi grows rice and sells it in the market. When he sells his rice, he pays shulka because he is selling goods in the city. If he brings oranges from another town to sell, he pays a shulka on that too. Ravi's land is hit by a flood and he can't grow rice. According to Kautilya's rule, he doesn't have to pay taxes on that flooded land. The king collects taxes in rice. Instead of selling all the rice immediately, the king saves some as buffer stock to use later if there is a food shortage. The forest near Ravi's farm is owned by the king. If someone wants to cut down trees, they must ask the king first, as it is considered state property. By understanding these points, you get a clear picture of how taxes and resources were managed in ancient India, especially under Kautilya's guidance. Let's dive deeper into this, making it even simpler to understand. 1. Land for ascetics. What does the Arthashastra say? The Arthashastra recommends that the king give land that's not good for farming to ascetics. These ascetics are people who focus on spiritual activities like studying the Vedas, ancient religious texts, and doing soma sacrifices, special religious rituals. Example: imagine there's a piece of land in the wilderness where nothing can grow. The king gives this land to a wise, peaceful monk to use for prayer and teaching. The land can't be used for farming, but it's a perfect place for spiritual practice.
Anarastu!
Tax-free land for priests. Who gets the land? The king also gives tax-free land to brahmanas, priests and scholars, and other religious people like Ritvik, a priest who performs rituals and sacrifices, a teacher or spiritual guide, a priest who works for the royal family. What does tax-free mean? Tax-free means they don't have to pay any taxes on this land. Plus, the land can be passed down to their children. It becomes hereditary. Example: a king might give a priest a piece of land as a reward for helping in religious ceremonies. This priest wouldn't have to pay any taxes on the land, and when the priest dies, the land goes to his children.
3.
Land for important workers.
Who else gets land?
The Arthashastra also says that other important workers can get land, such as adhyakshas, officials who have important jobs in the kingdom; accountants, people who keep track of the kingdom's money and resources; gopas and stanikas, these are local officials who manage smaller areas; elephant trainers, people who train elephants for war or work; physicians, doctors who take care of people's health; horse trainers, people who train horses for the king; couriers, messengers who deliver important information. What rules apply to their land? These workers cannot sell the land or use it for loans, mortgaging it. The land is given as a reward for their service, but it has limitations. Example: a king gives an elephant trainer a piece of land. The elephant trainer can live on the land and use it, but he can't sell it or borrow money using the land as a guarantee. Number 4, brahmanas and taxes. Megasthenes, a Greek ambassador who visited India, wrote about brahmanas. He said that brahmanas didn't have to pay taxes, which likely included land taxes. Example: a brahmana, a priest, owns some land, but unlike regular farmers who have to give part of their crops or money to the king, the brahmana doesn't have to pay anything to the king.
Number 5.
Ashoka and gifts. Ashoka was a famous Indian emperor known for his generosity and kindness. While there are no records that Ashoka gave land grants like the Arthashastra suggests, there are records of other gifts made by Ashoka and his family. 1. Ashoka's general gifts. In one of Ashoka's pillar edicts, messages carved into stone pillars, he mentions that he and his family gave gifts, but he doesn't say exactly what those gifts were. Example, Ashoka may have given money, food, or help to temples, people, or communities, but the exact details are unknown. 2. Queen Karuvaki's gifts. Ashoka's wife, Queen Karuvaki, is mentioned in another pillar edict. She gave away things like mango groves, large gardens of mango trees, gardens, beautiful green spaces, almshouses, buildings where poor people could come for free food and shelter. Example, the Queen might have donated a big garden full of mango trees so people could enjoy the fruit, or she built shelters where poor people could stay and eat for free. 3. Ashoka's caves. Ashoka and his grandson, Dasharatha, gave caves as gifts to Ajivika ascetics, spiritual people who followed a strict lifestyle. These caves were used by the ascetics for meditation and living a simple life. Example, Ashoka gave a quiet, peaceful cave in the mountains to a group of monks so they could focus on their spiritual practices without distractions.
6.
Other simple points. The Arthashastra shows how kings were expected to support religion and government workers by giving them land. It also emphasized that people who did important work for the kingdom, like priests, teachers, doctors, and trainers, needed to be rewarded in ways that helped them focus on their jobs. Kings like Ashoka were known for giving gifts, not just to religious groups, but also to the poor and needy. These gifts were meant to show kindness and care for all people in the kingdom. Simple example to understand the whole thing. Imagine you're a king. You have a lot of land in your kingdom. Here's how you handle it. You give land in the wilderness to spiritual people so they can pray and meditate. You give tax-free land to priests so they can perform religious ceremonies. This land stays in their family forever. You give land to your workers, like doctors and trainers, as a reward for their service, but they can't sell it. You and your family give gifts like gardens, caves, and houses for the poor, showing your generosity and care for everyone. By understanding these simple examples, you can see how land and rewards were used to support important people and religion in ancient times, following the advice of Kautilya in the Arthashastra. Let's explain this step by step in the simplest way possible. 1. The Arthashastra and the economy. What is the Arthashastra? The Arthashastra is an old Indian text written by Kautilya, also known as Chanakya, and it talks about how a king or government should run the country. What does it say about the economy? One of the amazing things about the Arthashastra is that it talks about how the state, government, should be involved in almost every part of the economy. This means the government participated in agriculture and trade, controlled resources like land, mines, and forests, regulated, set rules for how businesses and workers operated. But even though the Arthashastra suggests all these things, it's very unlikely that the Maurya Empire, the big empire that existed when Kautilya was alive, actually did everything the text says.
2.
State-owned land and farms. What about land? The Arthashastra says the state government should have large areas of land called landed estates. These are like government-owned farms. Who worked on these farms? The paid workers, people who were hired and paid money to work on the land. Sharecroppers. These were people who worked the land and gave a part of their crops to the state as payment. Example, imagine the government owns a big farm. Some workers are paid to take care of the crops, while others are sharecroppers who give some of the food they grow to the government. 3. Shunyanivesha, building villages on empty land. What is Shunyanivesha? The Arthashastra talks about Shunyanivesha, which means building new villages on land that no one is using. This was an important task for the government. How were the villages made? The text suggests that a new village should have 100 to 500 families living in it. Most of these families should be from the Shudra class, the class of workers and labourers. Example, the king finds a big piece of empty land. He builds a new village there with 200 families who are mostly workers and farmers. 4. Vishti, labour for the state. What is Vishti? The state could take something called vishti from the people. Vishti can mean different things. Forced labor. This is when people are forced to work for the state without being paid. Labor in place of taxes. Instead of paying taxes, some people might have worked for the state to fulfill their tax obligations. Example: if a farmer couldn't pay his taxes, the government might make him work on a state-owned farm or build a road instead of paying money.
High five!
Was all of this really done? Did the Maurya Empire do everything the Arthashastra says? Even though the Arthashastra suggests a lot of control by the government, it's unlikely that the Maurya Empire did everything exactly like the text describes. The Arthashastra is more like a guidebook, telling the king what should be done, but that doesn't mean it was always done that way in real life. Example: the Arthashastra might say the government should own a lot of land and control farming, but in reality the Maurya Empire may not have controlled everything like that.
Nam 6.
Extra information for understanding: why does the government control so much? Kautilya believed that a strong government should control important parts of the economy to make sure the country stayed strong. If the government owned land, mines and resources, it would have more power and be able to help people during hard times, like famines or wars. Example: if the government had large farms and stored a lot of food, it could help feed people during a drought when crops weren't growing. Summary in simple terms: 1. The Arthashastra says the government should play a big role in the economy, controlling land, resources and trade. 2. The government should own big farms where workers or sharecroppers work the land. 3. Shunyanivesha means building new villages on empty land, and these villages should be filled mostly with workers, Shudras. 4. Vishti means labour that people do for the state, sometimes instead of paying taxes. 5. While the Arthashastra gives all these ideas, it's unlikely that the Maurya Empire did everything exactly like this in real life. This approach shows how much the Arthashastra wanted the state to manage and control things, but reality might have been different. Let's break down this information step by step in the simplest way. 1. Kautilya and control over markets. What does Kautilya say about markets and trade? Kautilya believed that the government should have strict control over how goods were made, sold, and priced. He talks about specific officers who were in charge of these things. 2. Who controlled trade? Officer in charge of trade. There was an officer called the Panyadyaksha. This person was in charge of all trade, buying and selling. Their job was to fix prices, decide how much something should cost, manage state-run factories. These factories made goods, like textiles or chariots, that belonged to the government. Example: imagine the government runs a factory that makes clothes. The Panyadyaksha decides how much each piece of clothing should cost and manages the factory. 3. Who controlled the markets? Officer in charge of markets. The Sanstadyaksha was the person who made sure that markets, places where people buy and sell, ran smoothly. Example: this officer might walk through a busy marketplace, checking that all the shops are selling things fairly and that everything is organized. 4. Who checked coins and weights? Inspector of the Rupadashaka was the officer who checked coins to make sure they were real. This was important because people used coins to buy things, and fake coins could cause problems. Officer in charge of weights and measures. The Potavadyaksha made sure that all weights and measures used in markets were accurate. This means that if a merchant said they were selling 1 kilogram of rice, it really had to be 1 kilogram. Example: imagine you go to buy a bag of rice. The officer checks that the scale used to weigh the rice is correct, so you don't get cheated. 5. Control over artisans, craftsmen, artisans' guilds. Kautilya believed the government should have control over the artisans' guilds. A guild is a group of workers who have the same skill, like carpenters, blacksmiths, or clothmakers. Wages for artisans. Kautilya set a scale of wages, which means he decided how much each type of artisan should be paid for their work. If an artisan didn't deliver the proper goods, they could be punished. Example, if a carpenter makes a table, but it's not built properly, the government could fine or punish him for poor work. 6. The government as a business owner. The Kautilyan state as an entrepreneur. Kautilya imagined the government running businesses too. This means the government could own factories and workshops. For example, a textile workshop for making clothes would be managed by an officer called the Sutradayaksha. A chariot workshop for making chariots would be managed by an officer called the Rathadhyaksha. Example, the government owns a factory that makes clothes. The officer Sutradayaksha manages the factory and makes sure it runs well. Another officer, the Rathadhyaksha, runs a workshop where chariots are built. How does your 7? Could any ancient government do all this? Was this level of control possible? Even though Kautilya described a system where the government controlled almost everything, it's unlikely that any ancient government, including the Maurya Empire, could actually control the entire economy and society in such a strict way. Why did Kautilya imagine this? Kautilya was very smart and had a strong ability to think and plan. He probably dreamed of an ideal system where the government could have maximum control. He was writing during the Maurya period, when the state was very powerful, so it made sense for him to imagine a government with a lot of control. Example, imagine Kautilya is thinking, what if the government could control everything to make sure everything is perfect? But in reality, no government could control every market, every business, every worker in such a detailed way. 8. Summary of key points. 1. Kautilya believed in strict government control over trade, markets and businesses. 2. Specific officers were in charge of trade, checking coins, measuring weights and managing businesses. 3. The government even had control over how much artisans should be paid and punish them for bad work. 4. The government could run its own factories and workshops, like ones that made clothes and chariots. 5. However, no ancient government, including the Maurya Empire, could actually control everything as Kautilya imagined. This gives you a simple and clear picture of how Kautilya thought the economy should be controlled by the state, though it might not have been fully possible in reality,